Hey guys, how's it going? It's Danconia and welcome back to the Overwatch League Roundup 2020 Week 12 preview. So this is it. This is the week. This is going to be a really good week in the Overwatch League. So this week we will see 10 fixtures. And this week we will see Seoul Dynasty returning. Remember, Seoul Dynasty have only played 2 games this year, but have actually won both of those games against the Valiant and the Gladiators, and are tipped to be one of the best teams in this league, and Seoul will have a big test this week to determine whether they live up to that name. Also, we get to see NYXL again this week. NYXL have moved to Korea and are now going to be playing in that Asian region against the Chinese teams, against the Korean teams, against London eventually, probably whenever London decide to come back. There's going to be some really good games this week. Really good games. We've got Battle of Texas, we've got Shanghai Seoul, we've got all sorts of really juicy matchups to look forward to this week. It's going to be a really good week, possibly one of the best of the season yet. So, also, I'd like to commend the Overwatch League on its scheduled timings this week. Last week, the scheduled timings for Europe were awful. Absolutely awful, with the Paris game taking place after midnight. It was not particularly bright. But this week, all of the matches are actually at watchable times in the EU. I know they aren't in NA. I know the Asian matches are actually a bit difficult to watch in NA. I'm not sure how the New York one stands up in terms of NA timing, but yeah, it's rough for NA, those Asian games. But this week will be brilliant for EU viewers if you want to watch games, because they are literally during the day, every single day. There is not one that goes, well, there might be some that bleed over midnight, but there's none that start after midnight, which is really, really good. But we will start off with the first fixture of the week then, Saturday, April the 25th at 9 AM. We are in Asia. We are at Seoul Dynasty taking on the Hangzhou Spark. So this is Seoul Dynasty's easier match of the weekend, or arguably easier match of the weekend. Now we have to remember that Seoul Dynasty, even though they're not a Western team, I would say they are the most Western out of the Asian teams. Now what I mean by that is that they play the most Western style. When we look at Hangzhou, Guangzhou, Shanghai, Chengdu, they tend to be a bit chaotic. Chinese Overwatch tend to have this little mini meta that, you know, bashes around in there, makes things a bit weird. Seoul Dynasty will play much closer to the meta, much closer to what you would see Atlanta, Philadelphia, New York play. So there's going to be a clash of styles here possibly. Hangzhou less so. But when we get to see Seoul take on people like Chengdu, which is not this week, it will be really interesting. Seoul versus Hangzhou though, this should be a win for Seoul Dynasty. Hangzhou, they're not the team they once were. It seems harsh saying that, because they do have some really good players still, but they are not the team that they were last year. I don't think they're going to be able to achieve what they achieved last year. Seoul Dynasty, however, are vastly improved on what they were last year. So I'm expecting Seoul Dynasty to come out on top in this one, and I'm actually expecting Seoul Dynasty to quite handily come out on top. If they can beat the Los Angeles Gladiators trio, they can beat the Hangzhou Spark trio. I think what will be most interesting from Seoul this week is their tank line, because we know how good Marvel is, we know how good Gesture is, but they've also got Michelle. And last time we saw the Seoul Dynasty, they ran Orisa Reinhardt or Orisa Sigma. So they ran Marvel and they ran Gesture together. We did see a bit of the Marvel Diva as well, I must say that. But it'll be interesting to see, with no Orisa this week, whether they go back to playing Michelle in the off-tank role, because it will be an off-tank role, unless we see Reinhardt Sigma. And I'm not anticipating that, although I might be wrong, I'm anticipating Reinhardt Diva. So it'll be interesting to see if they switch back to having Michelle in an off-tank role, or they'll stick with Marvel. It'll be very interesting to see what happens there, but I would expect Seoul Dynasty to get the win. Moving on, and at 11 AM, on the Saturday, we will see Guangzhou Charge taking on the Shanghai Dragons. This should be fairly easy for the Shanghai Dragons, considering the current form the Dragons are on. They should be able to see out a win over the Guangzhou Charge. On current form, you'd perhaps expect them to get a 3-0. I wouldn't be surprised to see the Guangzhou Charge get a map or two, because the meta will favour them. You can put Happy on the McCree, you can put Happy on the Widow. It's going to be really good for him this week, so we could see a Guangzhou Charge upset, but I would expect Shanghai to get a win here. But this week we have an extra match in Asia at 1 PM on the Saturday. We will see New York Excelsior taking on the Chengdu Hunters. Now, this is a difficult one to call, and the most difficult one to call in my opinion. And I know people will say, well, Chengdu are 16th, New York are 4th, New York have looked good all season. Well, there is that. But there is also the break effect. And what I mean by the break effect is all the teams we've seen so far have an extended break. San Francisco Shock, Vancouver Titans, although Vancouver Titans might be a little bit of a unique scenario, as I'm sure some people will have heard. New York have been on an extended break, and the week back after that extended break typically hasn't gone very well for these teams. So this week could be an anomalous week for the New York Excelsior. I'm not saying it will be, but it could be. And Chengdu Hunters, they're not adverse to upsetting the big boys, are they now? So this, I think, possibly is more difficult for New York Excelsior than their second match of the weekend. However, I will still back the NYXL to come out on top, because the NYXL do have some crazy good quality. And again, the meta, it kind of favours New York, but it kind of favours New York always, because they have always been very good at adapting to what needs to happen. So I would expect New York to come out on top, but I don't think it's going to be easy for them. And we could see an anomalous week, as I said, with New York coming back from a very long break. But we have a break then, and at 9 PM on the Saturday, we will see a Barnstormer, because we will see Atlanta Reign taking on the Philadelphia Fusion. So, Philadelphia Fusion, they're one of those teams challenging for the best team in the league title at the moment. I would say at the moment, when you look at the stats and the paper, on paper, you would have to say that 4 teams are battling out for that top team in the league spot. Seoul, Philadelphia, Shanghai and New York. Now, obviously it will depend on what happens with New York and Chengdu. But Atlanta are knocking on the door. They have been for a while. They're in that 5th place. They want to be part of the big boy group, not the chasing the big boys group. So Atlanta Reign need to start taking wins off of the likes of Philadelphia Fusion, because they're not going to be playing Seoul anytime soon. They're not going to be playing Shanghai anytime soon, and they're not going to be playing New York anytime soon. So they're going to have to start taking matches off of Philadelphia Fusion, because they're the only team that they can really touch in that top 4. So it's gonna be an interesting one. I still think Philadelphia Fusion are gonna have too much for the Atlanta Reign. The Philadelphia Fusion are looking so darn good that I don't know many teams that can take this Fusion squad down right now, apart from perhaps teams in that top 4. And again, there's stuff to be decided on that later on in the week. But after that, at 11 PM, we will see the San Francisco Shock taking on the Los Angeles Valiant. Again, this has the possibility of being a weird one, because Valiant, despite their 18th place right now, they're not a bad team. We thought Valiant were going to be a bad team, but they're not. They've proved to us that they are actually very competent, and that 18th place right now, that 2-5 record, doesn't actually tell the whole story of the Valiant this season. So it's going to be a tough one, but the Valiant, they could sneak a win against the Shock. The Shock have not looked brilliant this week, and Dallas proved last week that it is possible. A tiny bit more. It was on a knife's edge between Dallas and Shock last week, so I still think the Shock are going to come out on top, but it ain't going to be easy for San Francisco. It hasn't been for most of the season. So Valiant, there is hope of a win there. But moving on to the Sunday, 9 AM, we will see Hangzhou Spark taking on Chengdu Hunters. Again, it's a difficult week for Hangzhou Spark, and they had a 0-2 week last week, and that was disappointing, going up against some teams they could have beaten. This week, it's 2 teams that, Chengdu slapped them around, and Seoul Dynasty, you just have to say, are just better than Hangzhou Spark on paper. So it's a tough week for Hangzhou Spark. I will back the Chengdu Hunters to get a win, especially with a main improving on his flexibility in that main tank role. Chengdu have really good DPS as well. I think Chengdu, again, much like Valiant, that 3-5 record, that 16th place, not telling the whole story for that team. So I think it will be a close one, but I would expect Chengdu Hunters to come out on top with a win here. But at 11 AM, this is the match of the weekend, without a doubt. I'm sorry, Reign Fusion. It's this one. The Shanghai Dragons taking on the Seoul Dynasty. So, 2 teams in the top 4. Shanghai Dragons, providing they get the win we would expect them to get over the Guangzhou Charge earlier in the weekend, on a really rich vein of form. Seoul Dynasty currently unbeaten if they get the win against Hangzhou Spark, which again we would expect them to. 2 teams we were expecting to be playoff teams, to be right at the top, battling it out for that number 1 seed. So this is such a teller game. Such a teller game. Big match. This will tell us where Shanghai are. It'll tell us kind of where Seoul are. We won't really know where Seoul are until they play New York as well, which again they obviously will do in this region. Perhaps next week. We never know. We don't know what the fixtures are for week 13. But this will be very interesting. If Shanghai win against Seoul, then the stonks of Shanghai Dragons will go up massively. Because Shanghai, they haven't had a massively difficult time of it yet. They avoided Vancouver last week. So they've only really played the Chinese teams. So they've avoided the really bad fixtures. This is a difficult fixture for the Shanghai Dragons. And so this is where we want them to stand up and say, we are, or want to be, the best team in the league. Seoul Dynasty, you're not taking that title from us. We're the Shanghai Dragons. We're better than you. And this is what we need to see from the Shanghai Dragons. Seoul, however, again, you can tell the Shanghai Dragons, hey, you're punching well above your weight here. We're Seoul Dynasty. We're going to win this league this year. And that is the goal of Seoul Dynasty this year. When you look at the transfers they've made, when you look at their first week, back in week 8, I think it was, good looking team, and have been rated very highly in pre-season, picking up some very big name players. So this is so difficult to call. So difficult to call. Because we've seen so little of Seoul, and we haven't seen Shanghai take on a big variety of teams, so it's a very difficult game to call. But I would go for Seoul, but I think this one will go the distance. I think we're going to see some crazy good Overwatch in this match, and there's going to be some really interesting matchups. I think Shanghai have the better support line. But when it comes to tanks and DPS, ooh, tough one. Tough one. I think the tanks win it for Seoul, but DPS, ooh, would be interesting. The new line of DPS versus the more old hats of the likes of Prophet. Be very interesting to see how that one works out. But at 1 PM, we will see the Guangzhou Charge taking on the New York Excelsior. So, New York Excelsior, if you want to be at the very top of this league, then this has to be a week where you go 2-0. But as I said earlier, it's possible it'll be an anomalous week. Remember that Guangzhou Charge actually swept the Vancouver Titans last week. But that could be a weird result considering the situation at the Vancouver Titans right now. So take that with a pinch of salt. Sorry, Guangzhou Charge, not to take anything away from that win. It was a good win, but Vancouver Titans is a bit all over the place right now. So it's a good job they're not playing this week because don't know what sort of Vancouver Titans will be coming out. But New York Excelsior should have the quality to get past Guangzhou Charge. But Guangzhou Charge are another one of those teams. New York are facing 2 of them this week where they can really upset big boys at times. And it could easily be a 0-2 week for New York. I know it sounds stupid, but it really could. It really could. But New York, I would expect to come out on top, but predictions aren't everything this year. I think a lot of people have seen that. Predictions aren't everything. So New York come out on top, but I think it could be quite close. But again, a little break, and then at 9 PM on the Sunday, we will see the Florida Mayhem taking on the Boston Uprising. So the story is very simple here, Florida. You beat Paris last week. Very good win. Very good win. You must beat Boston. I mean, I'm going to say that to every single team that is taking on Boston Uprising. You must beat Boston Uprising, because if you don't, you're going to look stupid. I'm just going to put it out there. Florida, you looked really good last week. Set plays were really good and all that, but you can't have those set plays this week because there's no Orisa. So I want to see Florida Mayhem get a win against Boston Uprising if they want to be challenging for play-ins and stuff like that. but I want to see them do it comprehensively. They need to just pound the Boston Uprising into the ground. If they can get a 3-0 against Paris Eternal, however offish Paris Eternal looked last week, they can get a 3-0 against Boston Uprising. But again, this is this league, and who knows what's going to go on from one week to the next. But Florida should come out on top here and come out on top quite comprehensively. But our last match of the weekend is at 11 PM, and this is gonna be fun because it's the first Battle of Texas for this season, I believe. So, Houston Outlaws taking on the Dallas Fuel. Okay, interesting one, this one, because this is two teams that have looked up in the past few weeks. Obviously, we've already mentioned Dallas and their very good display against the San Francisco Shock last week. Houston Outlaws have shown us some very bright play in recent weeks as well. So, it's two teams in, despite their rankings of 15th and 17th, in actually not too bad a form. And actually, when you look at it, I'm looking at teams like Valiant, Fuel, Hunters, Outlaws, and they're below the likes of Defiant. And I'm thinking that they're on better form than the Defiant are, so it's a bit weird at the moment. But this is a very difficult one to call, and I think this one could go the distance as well. We've got a lot of games, a lot of matches that could go the distance this week. Reign, Fusion, Shock, Valiant maybe, Spark Hunters, Dragon's Dynasty, Outlaws, Fuel. There's a lot of matches that could go the distance. But I think the Fuel have got a bit too much for the Outlaws right now. I'm going to trigger a lot of people by saying that, but I'm also going to make a lot of other people very happy. So, the Fuel, their DPS line is something to behold. I mean, when I look at all the teams that are lower in the league, you know, Boston, Washington, Valiant, Fuel, oh, well, I'm talking about the Fuel, but Hunters, Outlaws, Spark, Mayhem, Defiant, Charge, Gladiators. I'm sorry, but I think the Fuel's DPS line as a whole is possibly better than all of those teams. So, yeah, the Fuel, I think, should get a win here. But with the sort of match it is, I mean, we saw the LA derby last week, and look how crazy that was. So, we never really know what's going to happen in these types of games, because a lot of it is run on adrenaline, a lot of it is run on emotions. But I think the Fuel have the quality to see past the Outlaws here. I think it depends how the Outlaws play. The Outlaws are going to have to play to their strengths. They're going to have to play the likes of Blase on the Doomfist and things like that if they want to get results here. But if you were going to play Doomfist, Dallas can match the Doomfist with Doha. And arguably, he's better. So, it's difficult. It's difficult to counteract the DPS of Dallas Fuel. And, again, the tank line, Gamsu versus Muma. I'd have to go for Gamsu. Again, probably depends on the hero being played, which is probably going to be Reinhardt. So, yeah, Gamsu. But, again, Note had a really good showing last week up against Joy Hyobin. He'll be up against Meko this week. And if he can give a display like he did against Joy Hyobin last week, he will beat Meko. So, it's a very tough one. But I'm going to go for the Fuel for this one. But that's going to be it for this week. This week is actually got some really crazy games in it. We should see a lot of map 5s, hopefully. We should see a lot of close fixtures this week. And it's probably going to give me a very difficult choice when it comes to Team of the Week. But for now, thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you'd like to give a like, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you in the next video. See you then.